If you've ever looked at an old photograph from the 1800s and thought, why does everything look so warm? You're not alone. Streets look dusty, roofs look bare, people stand around in coats that seem more decorative than insulating, and the kind of deep, bone-chilling winter we imagine, well, it's just not there. And today, we're going to walk into that mystery head-on. Because hidden inside those faded images, in the grain of old negatives and the brushstrokes of famous painters, lies a secret that could rewrite not only what we think about winter, but how we understand the climate of our entire planet. This isn't just a story about snow. This is a story about something much bigger, an atmospheric switch that may have happened almost overnight. A global event so profound that it changed the climate, the maps, the art, and even the history we were taught to trust. And as shocking as it sounds, the evidence isn't buried in scientific journals or classified archives. It has been sitting in plain sight for more than a century, waiting for someone to ask the one question nobody thought to ask. What if winter, as we know it, didn't exist until recently? Before you think this is some kind of wild theory, stay with me, because today we're going to pull apart paintings, photographs, maps, and historical contradictions that build a timeline far more unsettling than what we learn in textbooks. We're going back to a world that may have looked nothing like the one we live in now, and we're going to follow the clues to see where they lead. And the first clue begins in a painting.
The painting that shouldn't exist. There's a winter painting from 1871 that almost no one noticed until people began looking at it with fresh eyes in the 21st century. The Thaw, painted by a celebrated artist, shows a supposedly typical January scene, a deep winter moment frozen in art. But if you look close, the details don't add up. The snow is thin. The stream is fully liquid. Trees still hold on to their leaves as if autumn hadn't fully left. Birds crowd the sky, way too many for a midwinter landscape where food should be scarce. Nothing seems wrong at first glance, but once you know what to look for, the inconsistencies stack up like a deck of cards ready to collapse. Then there is another painting. The Rooks Have Arrived. You might have seen this one in museums, art books, or online. It's supposed to capture the moment early spring arrives. But again, the details openly defy reality. The snow is almost gone. The grass is visible in March, something that contradicts what we know today about Russian winters, which are famously harsh even by modern standards. This is the first crack in the story. Because you can write off one painting, maybe even two. Artists interpret, they exaggerate, they idealize. But when dozens, then hundreds of paintings across the 19th century start showing the same strange trend – mild winters, thin snow, early thaws, green fields, and months that are now brutally cold, you can't call it imagination anymore. You're looking at a pattern, one that repeats too consistently to ignore. And what the pattern says is this. The winters before the 1860s were not the winters we know today. But then something even stranger appears in the visual record. Almost like flipping a switch, the style of winter changes dramatically. After the 1860s, paintings explode with heavy blizzards, deep snowdrifts, frozen rivers, howling winds, and ice-buried cabins. All the hallmarks of what we consider classic winter suddenly appear everywhere. The question is, why? What changed so suddenly that artists across an entire continent shifted their depiction of winter from mild and hesitant to fierce and epic? You'll hear people say, "Oh, tastes changed. Artists began to like dramatic snow scenes." But that argument collapses instantly when you realize that art often reflects nature, not trends. And as we piece this together, the biggest crack in the official explanation comes from the technology of the era – photography, the camera that refused to see winter. Photography began in the early 1800s, and by the mid-century it had spread across Europe and the world. Portrait studios popped up. Traveling photographers captured landscapes, cities, architecture, everyday life. You can find hundreds, thousands of photographs from that era showing everything from street vendors to royal families. But you know what they don't show? Snow. Not a dusting, not a drift, not a winter storm. Nothing. Look through the photographic archives before the 1880s, and you will be stunned at how aggressively absent winter is. It's not just rare, it's virtually non-existent. Streets are clear, fields are brown, people stand in regular clothing. Horse-drawn carriages roll through roads that look dry and dusty. In cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, which today spend half the year buried in snow, the photographs from the 1850s and 1860s show nothing. Not even a hint that winter ever arrived. And the official explanation, at first glance, seems reasonable. Photography back then wasn't good for cold weather. But let's test that idea logically. If cold was the problem, why didn't photographers simply take photos from inside warm buildings? Through windows, open doors, balconies, covered porches? Why is there no amateur photograph from someone's home showing a snow-covered street from the comfort of heated walls? Why are there photographs of lightning, tornadoes, and even underwater scenes from the same era, but no snow? Think about that. In 1856, decades before winter appears in photographs, a German inventor took the world's first underwater photograph inside a submarine. The technical challenge of taking a picture beneath the surface of the ocean is astronomically greater than taking a picture of snow. Yet somehow, underwater photography existed before winter photography. The logic just doesn't hold, unless the real explanation is simpler and far more alarming. There was no snow worth photographing because winters weren't like ours yet.
And then, suddenly, everything changes. In the 1880s, winter appears in photographs almost overnight. Deep snowdrifts appear everywhere. Roofs sag under the weight of fresh powder. Rivers freeze into ice. Cities transform into the winter landscapes we recognize today. It's as if winter itself appeared out of nowhere. The same streets, the same buildings, the same camera technology, but in entirely different climate. And this is where things take a global turn.
The maps that showed the world wasn't always this cold. If this was just a Russian story, maybe we could write it off as a regional shift. But when you broaden the scope to include ancient maps from Europe, Africa, and Asia, the picture grows unsettlingly clear. Maps from the 1500s and 1600s show Siberia not as a frozen wasteland, but as a green, temperate land with lightly dressed people, grazing animals, and, unbelievably, camels used as everyday transport. That alone raises questions that historians prefer not to touch. But then there's Africa. The Sahara Desert, one of the driest places on Earth today, is depicted in old maps as a lush region filled with rivers, forests, lakes, and dense human settlements. Ancient cities like Timbuktu appear surrounded by greenery, not miles of lifeless sand. It's not one map, it's dozens. No modern climate theory explains this accurately. The climate fluctuates argument doesn't account for such massive differences across continents. The Sahara would not transform from a rainforest to a desert in a few hundred years without leaving catastrophic evidence behind. Unless the climate zones of the entire planet were shifted. And that's when the most controversial idea rises. The poles were not where they are today.
It sounds outrageous until you realize it elegantly explains every anomaly. Siberia becomes temperate, Africa becomes lush, and the Arctic ice cap lies in a different latitude entirely. If the Earth's axis shifted or the crust moved relative to the poles, it would rearrange global temperatures instantly. And this is where the timeline becomes haunting, because the evidence points to one critical period.
The mid-19th century, the exact period when winter appears in paintings, when snow appears in photographs, when maps suddenly begin to resemble the world we know. So now we have to ask, what happened in the 1860s? Was it a natural disaster, a cosmic event, or something else? Let's keep digging. The historical anomalies no one talks about. If climate changed, history should show clear signs of a massive transformation. And it does, but only when we stop trusting the 19th century's version of the past. Look at the sculptures and paintings made during that era depicting medieval princes, warriors, saints, and nobles. They wear items that didn't exist in their supposed time. They ride sleds and carriages that weren't invented yet. They wear crosses their religion didn't allow at the time. It's not a few mistakes. It's hundreds. It's as if the artists simply didn't know what ancient life looked like, as if they were guessing. Because maybe the culture they were illustrating stretched back as far as we think. Maybe the ancient history of the region was being reconstructed, literally invented, while the climate itself was stabilizing into its new form. If the climate changed suddenly, destroying entire settlements or forcing populations to migrate, the historical record would become fragmented, and someone, some group, would have to rewrite it. But why? To hide what? That question takes us straight into the 20th century, where something even more disturbing happened.
Jump forward 100 years. The 1950s and 1960s saw a global frenzy of nuclear testing, explosions so massive they produced mushroom clouds that reached the stratosphere. Millions of tons of dust and particles were launched into the upper atmosphere, blocking sunlight and cooling the Earth. Scientists documented temperature drops across continents. Winters grew harsher, springs arrived later. Some called it a mini ice age. But here's the chilling part. This happened exactly 100 years after the 19th century climate shift, almost like someone was repeating an experiment. And the pattern raises a terrifying question. Was the original 19th century climate shift natural or controlled? If the planet was warming back toward its original pre-shift state in the 20th century, these artificial cooling events could have been attempts to slow it down, attempts to prevent something buried under ice, something lying at the edge of the world, something that global powers would do anything to keep hidden. Which brings us to the final piece of this enormous puzzle: Antarctica.
What lies beneath the melting ice? Antarctica is melting faster today than ever before in recorded history, and every meter of retreat reveals structures, geological formations, and anomalies that defy conventional explanation. Satellite imagery shows straight lines, geometric patterns, perfect right angles, features that nature doesn't create easily. Rumors swirl among scientists, explorers, and classified researchers about vast structures beneath the ice. Some believe they are natural. Others believe they are artificial. Either way, the ice is hiding something, and the timing of its melting is no coincidence. If the world before the 19th century was warmer, Antarctica wouldn't have been buried under miles of ice. It would have been exposed. Imagine what ruins, artifacts,
or technologies could lie beneath a continent-sized glacier that formed only in the last 150 years. The kind of discovery that could rewrite human history completely. The kind of discovery that powerful institutions might want to prevent. Now consider the chilling possibility. The 19th century climate shift created the ice. The 20th century nuclear tests preserved the ice. And the 21st century warming is removing the ice. We may be watching the final stage of a centuries-old cycle unfold. And when the ice fully melts, the world will see what has been hidden since the last global transformation. What if we're the first to notice the pattern? Everything we've seen, paintings, photographs, maps, climatic shifts, historical inconsistencies, nuclear cooling, connects into a single narrative. The climate we think of as normal is only about 150, 160 years old. And the world before that was radically different. Maybe the past wasn't lost by accident. Maybe it was buried, literally, under ice, revised in art, confused in history books, and forgotten through global catastrophe. And now, as the ice melts and the old climate returns, the truth is starting to leak through the cracks. The secrets are becoming harder to hide. The questions harder to ignore. So here's the final idea to sit with. What if global warming isn't destruction, but revelation? What if the planet is simply returning to what it was before the 1860s, peeling back the frozen layer of a very recent, very artificial era? What if the real mystery isn't the warming, but why the world became so cold so suddenly in the first place? And what if we are the generation that will finally see what lies beneath the ice?